I, along with my 4 older sisters and 2 older brothers, have been raised by my paternal grandparents in a Roman Catholic home. Yet, I don't remember there ever being a time in my life when I believed in a deity. When I and my brothers and sisters were very young, my grandmother brought us to church every Sunday. I remember not really understanding what it was all about in the early years, and how my older brothers always regarded the event with sneers on their faces. I don't think my grandfather really cared much about the religion, and I don't recall him ever speaking of God or the church. I think he just went along playing the part of the quiet chauffeur for the sake of keeping the peace. But aside from that one weekly event, going to church on Sunday, we didn't really seem to live a very devout religious lifestyle. It was more like a religious when it's not inconvenient way of life. However, about 2 or 3 times a week before bed, we'd gather around my grandmother's rocking chair, yes, the classic granny in a rocking chair, that was her, seated on the floor, and my grandmother would read from the Bible, then have us recite the Lord's Prayer. Thinking back on this, I think I know why I never bought into the idea that God was real. As a small child, the youngest of 7 kids being raised by my grandparents, my indoctrination was simply botched from the beginning. You see, bedtime stories were the job of my older sisters, and at school, kindergarten teachers would read stories to us. And what did they read? Fairy tales and make-believe sorts of stories. In the earlier grades, we learned to read from books full of make-believe stories. So then when my grandmother gathered us around her rocking chair, those 2 or 3 times a week, to read from the Bible, what did I assume it was she was reading to us? Well, when I heard of a magical-like being creating the world in 6 days, a man being created from dirt, a woman being created from one of his ribs, a tree that gave you knowledge if you ate of its fruit, and a talking snake, what was I to believe? It's another fairy tale. But it wasn't purely the fairy tales that undermined my indoctrination. There was a lack of religious observation in the home the other 6 days of the week. I suspect that it was a case of my grandmother just being too tired to remain diligent in her religion while taking care of yet a second family so soon after raising her own. Then there was the influence my older brothers, who really disliked going to church, had on me. They were preteen at the time, and any chance they got, they didn't mind telling us younger kids that God and religion was all bullshit. So in spite of my grandmother's wants and wishes, I grew up never really believing. But it wasn't until I reached my teens when I decided it was time to stop going to church. My brothers and sisters had grown up and moved out by this time. I had wanted to stop long before then, but I never had the nerve to tell my grandmother that I wanted to stop going to church until I was about 14. She didn't take it well and swore to remove me from her will. Which was okay because it was a very small price to pay to not have to go to church anymore. Church bored me, all that standing up, kneeling down, sitting down, and listening to some guy drone on about stuff I was too disinterested in to pay attention. So I grew up never believing in a deity. I was never convinced. Today, I've still not heard nor seen any evidence that seemed compelling enough for me to believe any deities exist. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to rate, comment, and maybe subscribe.